来呢，我们要进行的是高阶开幕座谈，主题是域名空间的未来展望。Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our forum. We will now proceed to the high-level opening panel discussion, focusing on what's next in the namespace. 这个场次呢，我们会去回顾网域名称空间的发展以及未来的展望，包含为何网域名称是不可或缺的数位资产。除了目前的功能之外，有哪一些可以使用域名之处，以及新通用顶级域名下一轮申请开放计划对于拓展网际网络域名系统的机会以及挑战。In this session, we will review recent developments in the namespace and explore future directions. Topics include why domain names are essential digital assets, how they can be utilized beyond their current functions, and the opportunities and challenges presented by the upcoming expansion of the Internet's domain name system through new gTLD program Next Round. 首先呢，我们先邀请这个场次的主持人以及与谈讲者至台上就座。And now we would like to invite the moderator as well as our panelists to please take your seats on the stage. 这个场次的主持人是 ICANN 亚太区利害关系人参与副总裁暨总经理 Samiran Gupta。Gupta 先生在商业策略以及公共政策咨询方面经验丰富，涉猎的产业呢包含了电信、娱乐、电子科技、电子商务、社群媒体以及能源以及再生能源等领域。We would like to invite our panelists to please take your seats on the stage, and the moderator for the session is Mr. Samiran Gupta, Vice President of Stakeholder Engagement and Managing Director of APAC-ICANN. Mr. Gupta has extensive experience in business strategy and public policy consulting in sectors including telecom, entertainment, fintech, e-commerce, social media, as well as energy and renewables. 接下来呢，我们就把时间交给我们的座谈主持人。I will now give the floor to our moderator, Mr. Samiran Gupta. Mr. Gupta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And quick apology for being a little delayed in starting this session, but we are all here and we're ready to go. So just starting out, I just wanted to introduce my panelists today to you. And on my right, actually everybody's on my right, so I must be in the wrong. So on my immediate right is Jiofan Yu, Managing Director and CEO, TWNIC. Welcome to the panel. Seated next to her is Sally Costerton, Senior Advisor to President and Senior Vice President, Global Stakeholder Engagement, and a dear colleague at ICANN. And after that is Alban Kwon. He is the Head of Corporate Development and Strategic Alliances for APAC at CSC. And rounding up this conversation and this panel is Edmund Chung, CEO, .Asia organization. Welcome all to this panel, and I'm really looking forward to a very engrossing conversation. Now, what I decided to do is invite each panelist to make an opening intervention. And we've got two presentations. Alban and Jiofan will be using decks. So I'm going to start with Alban, if you want to kick this off. Thank you.
Thank you, Samiran. I'm not sure if my deck is coming up at the moment, but let me just have a chat about this particular topic. So what we are is an organization. We are a corporate registrar. We are quite an old company. Established back in 1899 with around 8,000 employees, and work with a lot of different large corporations. So this is really the background of what I'm trying to discuss in this panel. So one of the topics that Samiran gave me to talk about is actually how domain name and the namespace are developing, and especially related to newer technology like Web3 and AI. So I want to give you my perspective, at least, about how I see the namespace the domain name namespace actually evolve. So when we think back into the early days of internet, I think one thing to think about domain name is that we are using domain name as what we call web identity, or precisely website identity. Because at that point in time, we're really talking about the .com, the google.com, facebook.com. We really think about domain name as an identity of the website. And that's, after the .com burst, I think people's, how people understand domain name change as well, and it become what I would call business intellectual property. So I would emphasize the word business as well, because in the kind of the early days of the domain name, personal names are also being used. Like as an individual, I may have a website to kind of highlight my information, but that's really just stopped. And domain name are predominantly used on a business perspective. Corporation, businesses, they still use domain name to publish their own information about them and promote their information doing e-commerce. Now, the next kind of evolution of domain space or namespace is what I would call critical infrastructure. So, and this is actually happening quite recently. If you look into some of the laws, critical infrastructure law, we can find that around 2017, the mainland Chinese government released the China domain name regulation. We see Australia having a similar critical infrastructure policy as well. .gov Act from the US really see .gov, which is used by the US government to be transferred the management into CISA, the cybersecurity agency of US. So, and most recently would be the NIS2 directive from EU, so NIS2 is a cybersecurity directive of European Union. But if you look into NIS2, there's a lot of passages about domain name. How do you want to use domain name? It kind of creep into ICANN policy in my perspective, because it also talk about registration policy, as in real name verification elements, and how also into something called DNS abuse as well. So the question then is, what about the future? I would say that in 2025, what we hope to see is a re-emphasize of domain security also from the private sector, because we're really seeing the government around the world starting to understand and realize the importance of domain name as a critical infrastructure. But we haven't seen the same from the private sector. But if you think about domain name as critical infrastructure, it should be understood from across the board, right? We see large corporations like Google, they would know that Google.com is extremely critical for the success of the company. But how about the other corporation? We haven't seen that adoption of or emphasis of domain importance from the wider private sector as well, especially in the APAC region. So now the next phase, and we are kind of here, we are transitioning from the business intellectual property into critical infrastructure at the moment, in my opinion. Now, the next phase, especially when we think about newer technology as well, I think there are two things I want to highlight with you. The first thing is blockchain technology, or Web3. Now, Web3 technology or blockchain technology, I'm kind of neutral about it from a technological standpoint. It's mainly because I don't see a really innovative use of blockchain that is highly successful at the moment. The use is really on cryptocurrency at the moment. But one thing that kind of catch my eye is when you look into how blockchain domain names are being applied at the moment, a lot of the usage of blockchain domain are actually linked into personal identity, because the blockchain domain name is actually linked to the personal wallet, cryptocurrency wallet, and then the domain name become a personal web identity as well. So in the new gTLD program that we'll be discussing later today, and I can be quite sure that a lot of the blockchain domain company will be applying for a new gTLD this time. When these two merge together, can it change domain name value from more of a business intellectual property and critical infrastructure back into the original, where we are using domain name as an identity again, and especially personal identity. If it's successful, I think it's going to change the industry again, because domain name value and the volume of registration will go up quite significantly if personal identity being once again a usage. So the other side of things is about AI. I would say that how AI impacts the domain name space is currently unknown or not even discussed in details at the moment, in my opinion. Because when it comes to AI governance, a very important topic is about misinformation, disinformation, trust, right? So how can AI validate trustworthy information? That would be a critical point to really think about. So, and then would domain plays a role in how information are being validated and trust or not trustworthy? For example, if a news piece being published on CNN.com, you may argue that it is more trustworthy. So AI should give it a little bit more, weight in that sense. So it will, if it plays well, I think domain name as a critical infrastructure will be reinforced. Domain as a corporate intellectual property will also be reinforced as well. So, but honestly, I don't think even AI company are really thinking about this at the moment. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't see discussion in the AI governance or even in the domain name industry about how AI actually see domain name at the moment. So I would hope that we will be able to see a little bit more on that. But both of these, interestingly, will link back into the new gTLD program. Because as Web3, as I mentioned, a lot of the Web3 domain name is going to apply as a new gTLD, and the new gTLD is going to enable more widespread adoption. And new gTLD can also be evolve as a trust anchor for AI. If I am CSC, having a .csc, Google or other AI company would be able to see that is my authentic, authoritative information about my company or the information I publish. So that's what I'm thinking about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alban, for giving us an overview of how this ecosystem has evolved and where it might be heading. A bit of crystal ball gazing, I would say. But thank you. And that's precisely what, I wanted for this conversation to get kicked off with. We go to Jiufan next. And Jiufan, tell us, how are you looking at things, and particularly when you sit where you sit as heading a CCTLD, and how the domain name ecosystem is developing, and where do you think it's going?
Okay, thank you, Samiran. So I'm not sure it's my slides. Okay, so have the pen as well. Okay. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, today I'm honored to be join these discussions. My name is Jiufan Yu and serve as CEO of TWNIC. So TWNIC is a registry for the TW and the Taiwan, the top country code top level domain. And then we are also deeply involved in a lot of different things like digital policy, cybersecurity, and infrastructure development in Taiwan. So today I think it's a pleasure to share my thought with you today. But today I will be speaking primarily from the CCTLD perspective, and I hope to offer some insight, from the Taiwan market that may resonate more broadly across the global domain ecosystem. So, okay. So as we, sorry, okay. maybe the previous slide. Okay, thank you. So as we know that ccTLD are unique in that they represent a specific country or territory, and they often carry with them not just the technical responsibilities, but also the cultural and the national significance. So many ccTLDs, including the TW like us, focusing more on the serving the local communities, that is supporting the government services and supporting local business and any entity targeting local users. So we are not just providing the domain names, we are actually building the trust in the local internet environment. So in addition to our registry functions, ccTLD like TWNIC, we are also dedicated to promoting the widespread and responsible adoption of the internet in Taiwan. This includes everything from, for instance, supporting the digital literacy, open access to the internet, and to working together with the public and private stakeholders to ensure safe and resilient, inclusive internet for everyone. So that is the context I would like to bring to today's discussion. So how ccTLD as a local digital infrastructure are navigating rapid changes and global shifts in the internet landscape. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when we examine the current development in domain name space, we see that both the gTLD and also ccTLD are evolving, actually, under the pressure of changing user behavior and new digital threats and environment landscape. So from the ccTLD perspective, we think that one of the biggest challenges today is not about the infrastructure, it's not about the policy, but about the relevance. So in Taiwan, for instance, we have observed a significant shift in how users access online information. I think maybe it's not exceptional. The majority now is rely on search engines and also the social media as their entry point to the web. According to our 2024 Internet report, more than 60% computer users and also more than 50% mobile phone users use search to navigate the internet. It's more than half. And also the mobile phone users, nearly 40%, they use app to access to the web. Only fewer than 10%, they directly use URL to navigate the internet. So moreover, when people set up a blog or brand or business, we found around 35% prefer social media platforms over the traditional websites. And maybe you also notice there's one news issued by the Google that they will stop using the ccTLD, their top domain. So meaning that now maybe there's a question we need to ask ourselves. So what will be the ccTLD continue to, what role will ccTLD continue to play in users' digital journeys? So another question might become more urgent as we enter the AI time. So as Alban mentioned, AI impact a lot, here. So with the growing use of generative AI tools, so users are increasingly bypassing websites altogether. So they just prompt, they just receive direct answers rather than clicking through the links. So this will raise a fundamental question for us in the DNS community. So will domain names, remain relevant in an age where answers no longer live on the web pages? So will the domain name still serve as trusted indicators of identity or source? We don't know. At the same time, another pressing development is the rising volume of domain name abuse. Now it's of course, it's a critical, challenge for everyone. According to the report from ISO consulting company in 2024, the number of malware, phishing, and spam attack and search really rapidly involving now more than 8.6 million domain names. It's around 81% increase from the previous years. So in Taiwan's internet environment, according to our 2024 internet report, it's also over 60% of public report receiving scans message in just a 3 months period. And around like a 3% of people actually fall victim, but it's more than 700,000 people already. So, and with TWNIC, we are lucky. We are still, the abuse rate is relatively low. It's around 1%. But we see the steady increase, in the volume. And more importantly, according to our findings, over 91% of abusive domains targeting users in Taiwan are not .tw. So this really highlights a major challenge. For ccTLDs like a TWNIC, we often just have limited capacities. To address abuse that originate beyond our namespace, but actually it direct affect our users' trust and safety. So all this suggests that while domain names are still essential digital assets infrastructure, but we must involve the narrative and also the value propositions. Whether we use, whether we improve our integration with the AI systems, or we build stronger abuse mitigation framework. But ccTLDs must continue to demonstrate their relevance and trustworthy in this all quickly changing internet and landscape. So we talk about a lot of challenges, but challenge also means opportunities. So I think it's traditionally, just Albert mentioned, domain names were just tools for website or emails. But today, I think they are becoming more like a digital assets that support the identity and authentication and even interaction, with emerging technologies. So in TWNIC, we believe that a ccTLD should be more than a registry, but we should serve as a trust anchor, for the local community. And our users, because we do user surveys recently, and this survey also shows that in Taiwan, 47% of users say the TLD influence whether they trust a website or not. And 55% check the TLD when they access unfamiliar sites. So I think all these figures underscore that user actually expand domain names to help them to assess the credibility and the safety of website. So I think that's why maybe some of them are aware we have some experimental projects. So we try to do some new models, for domain transparency and accountability. We call it Green Domain Verification Service. We launched actually in May. So, which is a KYC-based registration process to strengthen the trust in ownership, but at the same time, to give user more who-is-based information about the TW domains. So, and we see, of course, around, the world, we see also other TLD operators innovating. So, like a blockchain or digital wallets. I think it's all the exciting, expansion of what domain names can do. So, I think all this point to a single, truth. ccTLDs are evolving, and we must evolve. We must embrace, innovation, and also to re-emphasize the trust. So we need to provide the value, and we act not only at digital. We are not only as a domain registry, but actually we are the digital infrastructure to supporting a healthier and safer internet. Okay, so please next one, yes, and next one, please. So what is the future? For the TWNIC and for the ccTLD. For me, I believe there's two keywords: is data and cooperation. And first, cooperation. So in Taiwan, our data shows that, just mentioned, over 98% of DNS abuse originated from domains outside the TW. This highlights the challenge that no ccTLD can solve alone. So if we truly want to protect our users, I think a collaboration will be really critical. It's not only the registrar, but also cross the sectors. We think the better mechanism will be for the real time, like intelligence sharing, for coordinating, abuse response across TLDs, and also for promoting best practice through collaboration, I think will be really critical. And that's why we are really honored, and also we are happy to, work together with our partners now, two, on the stage. CSC and .Asia, we want to, to promote and join, Trusted Notifier Network. And we also are really happy, that we also join, ICANN's, abuse intelligence like a metrics, and then beacon, so that we can share and also receive more intelligence. So, so I think it's, in addition, I think just I mentioned, I think our partners should not be limited, to registry and registrars. Like platforms like, big platforms and ISPs are also our value partners, especially in the local communities. So I think for CTLD, we need to be really creative and stay close, communication with our stakeholders outside our traditional community, that is registry and registrar. So the second keyword for me, I think, is data. So for CTLD to remain relevant and resilience, so we must become more data-driven in how we operate our business. So it's no longer just simply just manage a registry. We need to deeply understand our market and how, internet evolved, and our user experience and also our user, behavior, and how people perceive the role of domains, in the internet landscape. So I think at TWNIC, we are investing more in data collection analysis to help answer, all these critical questions. I think that kind of insight is critical for us. I think not only for the innovation, but also we think it's truly important is evidence-based, decision-making in areas like marketing, abuse prevention, and also policy developments. So in short, I think the future of CTLD will be shaped by our ability how to harness the data and how to deepen our cooperation with our partners. And I think it is a key for us to remain, relevant and trust. So I think I will stop here. I stop here and then welcome, the questions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jo-Fan. So you mentioned trust so many times. We spoke about trust this morning as well, and I just noticed to get to the internet in this room, the password is trust in every click. So I thought I'll remind everybody why trust is so important in our world. Thank you. Edmund, you've been a community member participating actively in ICANN's work. Tell us your thoughts on the next round of the new gTLD program, and what do you think are the opportunities and the challenges?
Thank you. Very happy to talk about ICANN, new gTLDs, and I will talk about IDNs as well as. So, but I did want to, building off what Albin and Jo-Fan was saying in terms of the trajectory of the domain name system, I very much hope and believe that not only personal domains but also web identity is a very important part of the concept of domain names, because the core value is a mnemonic that humans can use, right? Whether you're identifying a server, whether you're identifying a wallet, whether you're identifying a person. And I think Albin touched on the Web3, and I want to expand a little bit on Web3 because this is a hot topic, right? I will come back to blockchain and discussion, but I want to highlight one very important concept in Web3, which is decentralization. Today, we see a lot of centralization of the internet's traffic to large sites, to Google, to Facebook, and so on. I think the next iteration needs to decentralize that. And Web3 is also about what is called the social web. And the social web is what is called also a Fediverse, or a federated social media network. Basically, it's like Facebook, but with, it's like you can use Facebook like you use email. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that today, for the last 20-odd years, you use the internet. You can use your email address from your own domain, right? You can, of course, use Gmail. I still have my Hotmail account. And I also have my .asia account. I also have my ISOC Hong Kong email address account. I have multiple identities. It just doesn't make sense that my social media is only on Facebook, and that's just one thing. I should have social media on my own domain. And that's what the Fediverse is about. That's what social web is about. And I think every company, and hopefully ICANN, will have its own social media platform on their own domain, and that's what the Fediverse is about, and that's, I think, links to the personal identity into the future as well. And speaking about personal identity, that brings me to, of course, IDNs, because most of the people on this planet, we are speaking English right now, but most people don't speak English as their primary language, and therefore these web identities need to be in their own language for it to be meaningful and useful. And that one thing that I've been reminded of also is that actually there has, for a long time, this part of the technical community has been a little bit resistant with internationalized domain names, Chinese domain names in different languages, because sometimes it is a little bit of a hassle to manage, because it is a newer technology, although it has already been around for 20 years now. But one thing that I've been reminded of is that as new users come online, especially seniors, especially like my dad coming online, actually multilingual internet makes for a safer internet. Why? Because, well, actually, if you've joined any cybersecurity training, the first thing that you're taught is that to distinguish between a phishing website, you look at the domain name. And to look at the email address that someone sends you an email about, right? If that email address or that domain name is in the local language, for my dad's case, if it is in Chinese, it will be absolutely more, infinitely more easier for him to decipher whether it is, looks like a, coming from a trusted source or not. Instead, right now, mostly it's a string of alphabets that nobody even look at, and that's what, a lot of times phishing happens. So interestingly, I think, this is a bit of a call to the technical community. It's who are implementing domain names, and email addresses, think a little bit more about it. In fact, multilingual domain names or the multilingual internet actually makes for a safer internet for the larger part of the world. And this is something that I think is important. That being said, it has been a challenge, as I said, and the universal acceptance of IDNs is still a challenge. And on that, I think it is going to need a little bit more intervention because I feel that there is a kind of a market failure. There's latent demand. I believe that people actually do value being able to see the email address and domain names in their own languages. However, there is a market failure in that the deployment of the technologies to enable this is still not quite there. And I think that will require market intervention. And that brings me to the new gTLDs. I think it's going to be very important for the different countries to think about their own languages, and here Chinese domain names are in Thailand, and Thai domains, in Japan Japanese domain names. That's going to be important, and I think it will take a little bit more of a market intervention by governments, by policymakers, to encourage the usage and encourage the application of new generic top-level domains. And that brings me to trust. Sally this morning talked a little bit about trust. I mentioned just now, emphasized how the multilingual domain names can actually build trust. Actually, I think it is when I first came to ICANN to participate. In fact, I was coming to ICANN to promote internationalized domain names, but also to defend a single authoritative root, because back then. There were various companies that are looking into internationalized domain names and creating alternate routes out of that. So 25 years ago, I came to ICANN to defend the single authoritative root, and we are now back at that situation, which is where the new gTLDs come in as well. Albin mentioned the blockchain names. They are alternate routes, and they are threatening the trust that we have built out for the DNS today. And opening the new round of new gTLDs to integrate them into the single authoritative root is going to be very important. So I think, I look forward to that, and that trust needs to be rebuilt and continue to be built. So new gTLDs are, an important part of it. The last point I want to make before I close this opening remarks is that, IDNs, of course, I mentioned, are important. Chinese, Japanese, other language top-level domains are going to be important. What else are the opportunities? Well, I think, brands, cities, that's obvious ones. But I think going forward, it's going to be very interesting to see verticals, industry verticals. I guess here in Taiwan, for example, think about .oem, That would be a cool domain. It doesn't have to be the fully generic COM. In fact, the too generic things that are too generic might actually have less value as we look about trust and and all that kind of thing. The other thing that I think is important is that when I started in the industry. Registries or top-level domains were about hundreds of thousands, millions of names. I don't think that's the future. I think the future, new gTLDs could be a few thousand names, 10,000 names, 20,000 names, but make a pretty good business, because it's actually not that difficult to turn a sustainable business. Well, maybe you won't have a new gTLD. In fact, I think, don't think of a new gTLD as a get-rich-quick scheme, because it's not going to be like that. But it will be self-sustaining quickly. Just a few thousand names, if you do the math, just a few thousand names, about 10,000 names, you'd definitely be turning a reasonable sustainability. Those are the communities that build trust. Those are the communities like the verticals that I think is going to be the real quote-unquote pillars, but these pillars are not one big pillar. They're going to be many small pillars that support the DNS and support the decentralization that I started with. So I think new gTLDs, I'm certainly very excited about continuing to roll out the new gTLDs, integrating the blockchain names, having multilingual domain names, but also these verticals and communities that can be built.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Edmund. You spoke about the single root and where we are, and also the opportunities that we are standing in front of. Sally, you've heard a fairly wide array of interventions from our co-panelists, sitting where you sit, not here, but at ICANN. I just wanted to get your perspective on how do you see all of this coming together. I mean, Edmund's painted a very compelling picture, and Albin's giving us some food for thought. Jofan's gone back to telling us more about trust. So love to hear from you.
Well, thank you very much, Samiran, and thank you to everybody. Wow, what a great discussion. And I think I've learned a lot just from being here this morning on this panel. And yes, just putting some of that together from ICANN's point of view, I think a couple of thoughts. First thing about, I'm going to call it access and inclusion. And I don't mean internet access. I mean access to the opportunities that Albin talked about and Edmund, you talked about, around identity and around as we know, what the internet has to offer businesses and communities in terms of their own identity online. And to make that as global and inclusive as possible, whether that's languages and scripts. I had a very interesting meeting, or I was at a very interesting meeting, and ICANN had a meeting in Seattle, one of our large public meetings quite recently. And at that meeting, I was part of a panel on universal acceptance. And there was a lady there from the Pacific Northwest who's an academic specializing in digitizing tribal scripts. It was a global project, actually, running out of the Seattle area. And it was absolutely fascinating. And she was talking about two things, and you touched on one of them with your dad, Edmund. She talked about the importance of recognizing that there are many languages in the world that are literally dying and that are beginning to be, when you've got a few people, hundreds maybe in some cases, that still speak certain languages and use certain scripts, and for whom the ASCII Anglo-Saxon world is completely irrelevant. And so they are excluded. They're excluded from many aspects, in fact, of life on the internet. And they probably also, typically, she was saying, tend to be older. So they are not typically digital natives. My mother-in-law, wonderful woman that she is, she's still driving. She's 90 next month. She's an incredible woman. But oh my goodness, when it comes to technology, oh dear. She hates her smartphone because she's not a digital native. She's a very intelligent woman. She was a school teacher. She's an academic. And she's bright and active. But just spending most of her life in a world that did not involve making an appointment to see her doctor using an app, for example, which is a particular area of problem for her. If you multiply that by the fact that at least she speaks English, and she can read ASCII, of course she can. But if I took it to your father, Edmund, or many of the people that this lady was talking about, that they are cultivating and writing down and digitally documenting these tribal scripts and languages. So I think for me, that opportunity that we have as we open up access to the next round of gTLDs is about that. And I say this in the nicest way. The CSCs of the world are, you get it. This is your business. You absolutely understand this. And the commercial registry and registrar community are a passionate and wonderful part of our community, and they are enormous supporters, of course, for extending access to the top-level domains. And it's your business, and you're very good at it. And I think a lot of you will apply, and we look forward to that. But my heart will leap when I see those applicant support applications. This is our program for underrepresented communities who may be challenged either financially or through just knowledge and expertise, people who probably have never been a registry. It's never occurred to them to become a registry. It's not something they've experienced. And my team have spent the last year or so on the road around the world, going out to meet people who we don't know, to say to them, if you are a local community, if you speak a specific language or a specific script, think about this. Think about this as an opportunity. We will help you. We will bring on mentors. We've had incredible response from the ICANN community for volunteers to mentor applicants. And I'm happy to say we're seeing a lot of interest this time around. Edmund will remember last time around. It wasn't such a great success last time. We learned a hard lesson. This time, I think it'll be a very different story. And seeing some of those people really want to become part of this community, I think is hugely exciting. And from our point of view, and especially in my role leading engagement at ICANN, I think we have a huge responsibility to come to places like this, to show the world that the internet is not an Anglo-Saxon idea, or at least it shouldn't be in the future, that we need to bring in other scripts, other languages, and it's very easy. I live in the UK, as you might gather from my accent. Some of you will be familiar with it. I gather it's quite distinctive. And I'm so lucky, I'm spoiled, lazy even, because the internet is designed to suit people like me. But you know, I came from London on the plane last night, and I changed planes in Bangkok. And as soon as I got off the plane, there, of course, is the Thai script. And then I land, and all the signs on the floor, you know, go to the international transit area, this kind of thing, all in Thai. And of course, they do translate it into English. But it had been a long flight, and I was quite tired. And I know, particularly the first time I went to Tokyo, I particularly noticed this. And then, for the first time, people like me know what it feels like. You land in a country that maybe you haven't been to before, and you don't know what anything says. And I have to keep reminding my team, our stakeholders, that for the majority of internet users in the world, that is their day-to-day reality. So I think that is our big opportunity, and I'm certainly taking more endorsement out of that from this conversation and leaning into that even more. Fascinating discussion around integrating, as a word you used, Edmund, the Web3 and the domain name system and the single root. I think that's, of course, a topic of great discussion at ICANN, as you and I both know. And I think from an engagement and communication standpoint, I would like us, as ICANN, to be, not just ICANN, the organization, but the community, to be clearer about that, to have a clearer point of view about what does that look like, in as much as we can. Because I think it's confusing, and it's too easy to paint these things as good and bad. You know, the domain name system is great, and it's the best. Well, the domain name system does a lot more than just provide an environment for websites to be successful. Not that many people are aware of that. The distributed architecture, for example, that makes email effective is coordinated by the DNS. But even I didn't realize that for the first few years I was at ICANN. We don't talk about that very much. I think that's a mistake. I think we need to be clearer and more comprehensive about what the DNS actually does, what that technical infrastructure delivers. That it is websites, but it is not just websites. I think that's a common misconception. And then what is the role of blockchain? What is the role of Web3 domains and their participants? And I was interested, Auburn, in what you were saying about bringing them together. I mean, as a CEO, as a business person in my former life, that makes a lot of sense. But I also know that sometimes in the internet community, these topics can take on an almost sort of religious fervor, if that's the right word. And I think we need to find our way through that, to work through something that is practical. Because the worst thing is that we alienate each other somehow, that we see this as a confrontation. And I don't think that's happened yet, but I think we need to be mindful of the need to paint the picture. And you talked about it in the context of identity and individual identity. I thought that was very interesting. And I'm going to take that back to my engagement team. I think we should discuss that idea more. I'm looking at you, Edmund, because you're very familiar with this. We don't talk about that very much inside ICANN, but I think it's a very interesting way of looking at what the sort of future of domains offers. And then finally, we talked about trust a lot today, and we talked about trust and verify, which is a very specific thing. And Kenny and Joe Fan are very involved with this, of course, as many of you know here, very much setting examples for the world of how to handle DNS abuse here in Taiwan with a very well-coordinated approach. And Kenny, you were talking earlier on to me, which I thought was very meaningful to share with the group, about that I'm going to call it a bottom-up process. Let's call it a Taiwan-up or a Taiwan-out approach of how do we solve problems nationally that are really global problems, because there's no global regulator that is going to come along and fix these things. There's no magic wand. We will fix them. And then we will show others how we have fixed them in an open and transparent way. And ICANN has a role here as a convener. It's a little bit less well known, ICANN's role in the technical ecosystem. And of course, all of you can be conveners. But because of ICANN's scale and geographical footprint and its size of its community, I think we have a particular opportunity to be conveners in meetings like this all over the world, where we can use our channels and use our platforms and access our meetings particularly, but also our working groups, our mailing lists. I mean, we are social media channels. We have a lot of tools, and I would like to see us use those to the maximum ability to help you all to share as we solve these issues and we preserve that trust. Because as you said, Oban, in the last 35 or 40 years, we got used to the idea of trusted web environments, trusted brands, should we call them that, particularly media brands. You use the example of CNN. If I go to CNN, I assume, if I go to the BBC, there you go, let's use an English example. If I go to the BBC, and probably if any of you go to the BBC, you have every reason to assume that you are hearing the truth. But we live in a world now where people talk about my truth. I want to speak my truth. That's a particularly common expression. I don't know if it's true here in Taiwan, but it's a very popular expression in parts of the US and parts of Europe. And this idea that truth is somehow not absolute, that it is subjective, and it depends entirely on who you are and how you perceive things. And that does not help us in the internet world, because people want, they want to know that if they're on a CNN site or a BBC site, that they're reading facts that are real. And we talked about with the minister as well, the issues around artificial intelligence, and you talked about this, Jo Fan, too. And although artificial intelligence is not central per se to ICANN's mission, it affects all of us. We all have to have a point of view. We have to know how to maximize the opportunities that it brings, but also to think deeply and discuss in the way that we know how, collaboratively, what should we be doing? How do we look round the corner at where that might represent risk? And how can we help ourselves to make the most of it and to mitigate any downside? But I would thank you, Samiran, for getting us together. Thank you. I think what an interesting discussion. Really, really good to participate in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally. And let me open the floor and see if we have any questions from the audience here. I think you can walk up to the mic. I can see 4 microphones in the room. Introduce yourself and ask a question. And if there's a question online, I understand it's going to show on my screen. So far, I don't see anything. I think...
Can I ask a question instead?
Please. That'd be great.
Oh, probably, yes. Maybe a couple of feedbacks first. I also find the conversation really interesting. I have to reply a bit because otherwise I would forget all the information and I won't be able to reply to it. So one thing that I find it quite interesting is how we talk about trust and getting the domain name back into the personal identity and things like that. I think that would be very important, and especially when we talk about IDN domain names as well. So I actually try to promote IDN domain names myself to corporates, but I have to admit that I felt quite miserable. And when I think back on it, it's really because domain name has become really a business use instead of a personal use. So is there any real need for corporates to represent themselves in IDN? At the moment, I don't think there is. Now, but the need actually exists, right? As Sally, you mentioned, there is a huge need that is uncovered at the moment. So, and when we think about this from using mainland China as an example, they did really localize internet, but they localize it in form of an app. So when people go onto the web, it's basically just WeChat. So and elderly people can perfectly use the web, the internet, through a particular application. They may change between a few different applications, but they never really have the need to actually go to a website. Now, it is good in some way because it's kind of involve and include people like that, but it certainly also fragment the internet in some sense as well, because for internet, that's basically just a particular company or particular service. So we certainly have a need to expand beyond that. And to do so, we really have to find a way for internet to be more accessible and also, personalize it in some sense, to be less of a corporate tool and go back into more of a identity for even a person. Then I think it would be, there's a more commercial need for a person to actually use domain name. I think Web3, the crypto domains and how it integrates with a personal wallet is a very interesting phenomenon. I don't know whether it will become a sustainable trend, but if it works, I think that would be quite rather interesting. And another thing I want to comment on is, Sally, you mentioned about our role in the industry to talk to the corporates, and one thing I want to emphasize in the APAC region is that ICANN, APAC, Samiran, Yanqing, they actually work with me on creating a platform called like a private sector engagement event. And it is actually quite surprising to me because as part of that private sector engagement, we only invited the larger corporates over, and we basically just talk about ICANN policy. And they're really interested in it. Some actually gave me the feedback that this is the best conference they attended for the whole year. And mainly because, they have no idea about ICANN policy. And a lot of the ICANN policy are really, really relevant to a business problem, like DNS abuse. Every single larger brand would experience DNS abuse. Even smaller company would experience DNS abuse. They don't know how to deal with DNS abuse because, as Jovan mentioned, 98% of the phishing attacks actually come outside .tw. I would argue it will also come outside Taiwan as the hosting country as well. The phishing attack would come from outside Taiwan. So for a small business, they don't know how to deal with it. There's no way for them to have the expertise to go to Singapore or Hong Kong to request a hosting provider to remove that particular phishing attack. So when we talk a lot about, when we talk to the business in their own language about ICANN policy, they are really interested. They really find that valuable. They want to participate in the discussion. And I don't think we have a really good way for them to participate at the moment. We certainly need to build that up. But even in going back to the IDN discussion, how do we build this kind of platform where we can talk about ICANN policy or internet governance in a way that a person actually understands? That is a big question I have in my mind, because the way how ICANN community talks, I can hardly follow. So I can be sure that they won't be able to follow either. So how do we actually do all this is a question that I think we as a community really have to think about.
Thank you, Alban. I think Jofan has some thoughts she'd like to share.
Yeah, I think maybe I just continue to provide some comments. So I think it's Alban, thank you. I think for raising this. You mentioned that the senior now maybe in China they use like app to access the web. So I don't think it's a fragmentation, because I think if usually in our community we think when we talk about fragmentation we think, oh, it's not the really right thing. But I rather see that it's an evolution of internet. It shift. The users. The way. To access the web. But it seems to me that sometimes we more focus on what we do, like a registrars. But sometimes we not so. Spend not so much time. Communicating or understanding. Other layers. Other players, in the ecosystem. So I think they have their own view. What is the internet? How they access the internet? I think it all impact. How our discussion. But sometimes I feel that we don't spend enough time. To understand that. More and to communicate more. I think so. Maybe I think it's my first comment. And second comment, I think at IDN. I think we talk a lot of IDNs. So I think I totally agree. With Alban. We also, we see more like a use case, and also good example is mainly from the individual. It's maybe it's more like cultural or more emotional. Use. It's not not so related to the professional. But I think it's because we recently, what I mentioned, we did a survey. We also, did a survey on IDN. And there's a very interesting, finding that actually, even including the professional, the business, including like around like 60% of people, they say they are not sure if they understand what is the IDN, And some of them, they even mention they think it's efficient, website, because they are not familiar, because it's not so relevant. They see, the TW or, is ASCII, but they don't see, the IDN more, often. So I think how to, before we talk about, how to have like a use case, I think it's also important that how we can communicate, more, I'm not sure how, but I think maybe it's very difficult. It's communicate more efficiently, effective with, the others, not in our community. Although we think it's like IDN or ICANN policy, I think it's we are so familiar with, and we know, like DNS abuse, like Sally mentioned, DNS abuse, we know, everyone knows in this community, we know what is it. But actually outside our community, maybe no one really knows what is that. So how we go outside our, comfort zone, community, how to talk to others, I think it's also something we need to think about. Yeah.
Thank you, Jofan. And almost like magic, we have 3 questions on the screen, and we have Kenny at the mic. So let's start with Kenny at the mic. Go ahead.
Okay, Kenny Huang, speaking in my personal capacity. And some just a comment regarding to what you discussed about, because actually we are in a horizontal layer of the internet. We are a network layer of the internet. So we're taking care of all the protocol stuff, IP address, domain name stuff, and put it into some work into IT. What I say is the things we create actually is application independent. So no matter what kind of application you use, internet is very flexible to accommodate, to support all kind of application. No matter what kind of infrastructure we deploy, either sea cable or submarine cable, or go to the sky, go to the satellite, it's all accommodated with the internet protocol. And that's why we are happily living in the middle layer. And we don't need to talk to the application people because we are happily living in our own region. But that could be the good thing because we are very specialized. We specialize to governance our layer. But the other bad thing is we don't need to talk to the application layer. We don't need to talk to the infrastructure layer. And we don't understand what they do for us. So just Rolfan just mentioned, all the people, basically most of the people probably don't using URL at all. They just one click go to grab the service they need. That could be true, but from the other hand, that could be exceptional fallacy, because actually internet service has a tendency of service centricity, because the 99.99% go only choose 1% of the service. Now, no matter what kind of search you use, always go to the Google. No matter what kind of application you use, or go to Microsoft. And it doesn't mean the other service doesn't available. It doesn't mean the other business will not have their existence. And that's why we do. We are not only serve the 1% of the business. We serve 100% of the business. And what we need to do, how to help them to transfer their business to be more visible to the global internet user. That's what we need to do. And we also need to talk, can we help? Can we do a little bit more to understand the application behavior, for example, like DNS abuse? Traditionally, we don't need to care about DNS abuse. We consider everything should be neutral, as long as it's a domain name should be neutral. But we are the gatekeeper. Frankly speaking, we are the gatekeeper of the internet, and we are the doorkeeper of the internet. If we're willing to open the door to look around, something we can identify, actually, it's very easier for us to identify that could be a potential abuse from technical tool, from technical measure that can be easily identified, because that kind of accessibility is not other people, they have that kind of privilege. Even law enforcement, they cannot open the door to see any bad guy sit inside, but we do have that kind of privilege. We didn't say we go to arrest the bad guy for us, for the law enforcement agent, but we can just a little bit demonstrate our very marginal power. Probably we open different door to the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any thoughts to?
I'll just quickly respond. I actually agree very much with Kenny on the point about us being as infrastructure provider, but actually understanding the application layer a lot more. I think into the future, we all talked about, kind of touched on AI, but we don't know what's exactly. That's where we need to understand, because it's the human behavior that ultimately, drives the internet usage and so on. So I think, whether I was talking earlier about Web3 as in social web and the decentralization, we need to understand a little bit more and how it plays a role into our work. So I just want to highlight that.
Thank you. Let me go to the questions on the screen, and starting from the bottom of the screen, quick question for Alban. Since more and more states see domain names as critical infrastructure, will that impose negative impact on the development of domain names, even has the potential of fragmenting does it have the potential of fragmenting the system? Alban.
Okay. I don't see any negative impact. I see a lot of positive impact, in fact. I can understand the second part of the question, why it may have lead to the question about fragmenting the system. But let me go back into the positive impact about more states seeing domain as critical infrastructure. If you don't think anything as critical, you don't think there's value. So if you don't think there's value, you don't care about it. So for domain name, if it's being seen as a critical infrastructure, at least you see people starting to see domain name as valuable. Now, and I think that goes back into Kenny's comment as well. When you really look into domain name abuse and the industry trend, I think Kenny recently shared an article on LinkedIn about certain European states starting to ask recursive DNS service provider to ban certain website. Basically, that's from an internet governance perspective, that's a question about DNS abuse mitigation, and it's crept outside our domain name industry into the recursive DNS industry, which is actually not really part of the ICANN structure at the moment. They are more in the APAC-TWNIC kind of structure because they are the ISP mainly, right? So, if people starting to think about this, they will actually starting to see the problem And then we have a chance to actually talk about the problem. Now, the bad thing about fragmenting the system is we only let the states to talk about it without any input from the industry. And they don't really have a global view on this kind of policy. Then we're going to see fragmentation because we're basically making rules of a global system on a individual state-by-state basis. If we're able to kind of facilitate the discussion on a global basis about how many of these threats outside DNS, into the, also involving the APAC-TWNIC community because it's linked together, right? Then we are able to kind of make better policy, and we won't see a fragmentation. We'll see a continued improvement of value. Now, my last quick example is that we're actually doing this with the private sector. They're starting to understand it. When they start to understand it, they won't ask the question, hey, how much is domain name? It's not the question. That's not a valid question. You're paying like a couple of dollars for a domain name in comparison to how much they invest in cloud infrastructure and all that is penny. And when the problem about the value of domain name only exists when people don't see the critical nature of domain name in the internet environment. So I'm hoping that this trend will actually go beyond state into the private sector, into the business world, and then into the individual world. So they all actually see the value of domain name.
Thank you, Alban. And just to add to what you said, and sometimes I'm just wondering it would have been better if I had been a participant and not the moderator, because I've got a lot of thoughts to share as well. But just to add a little bit, Alban, a lot of folks in the startup community are also getting introduced to, TLDs and the next round. And it'll be interesting to see whether they come forward as a trust-building measure to get their name out there. But only time will tell. Sally, can I go to you with the next question on the screen, which is, what specific actions can stakeholders take to strengthen the foundations of internet trust?
Thank you. Great question. And I will answer this from an ICANN perspective. I think when I talked about trust, we talked about it a lot today, but we talked about it in different ways. We use the word trust a lot for things that are technical, trust anchors, for example, but also about relationships, if you want to think about those at sort of two ends of a spectrum. Do I get to know people here? I talked about, meeting Kenny a long time ago, knowing Darong. Does that make it the internet more resilient? Yeah, I really think it does. Because we are at the forefront of change. It's what the internet is. It always has been, and I don't see that changing and stopping. So the question is then, how do we do more of that at ICANN, putting it simply? I mean, we kind of know what human beings understand when they think about it. What needs to happen for trust to exist? Because we think about all our relationships, our human relationships, even relationships with a brand. I spent many years of my life in public relations and brand building and communications and reputation management before I discovered ICANN. And brand, the definition of a brand or a successful brand is that every time you see that brand, let's take Coca-Cola, you go to it and it is exactly the same. So you see that famous logo in a drinks cabinet or the shape of the bottle, whether you're in Taipei or in Ouagadougou, and you are drinking the same product, because that Coca-Cola recipe, which we all know, of course, is a secret, is Coca-Cola's USP, is the recipe of the drink. And so that is about trust, and that is worth money, as you rightly say. So if we can be consistent and we can use the internet identifiers, which is ICANN's mission, the coordination of the technical identifiers, everything we can do to build that sense of repeat experience, These are trusted devices, trusted by everybody that uses them, whether they be private sector organizations like a Coca-Cola. And these were very much, there were a lot of brands that applied to the first round 12 years ago for the top-level domains when we first expanded it at ICANN. And they came partly for that reason. How do they create a branded, they have their own emails, they have their own websites, their own infrastructure that they own. So I think we can do more with the private sector. Brand owners, marketing directors, the strategy directors, and not just to bring their brands to the next round, but to participate in ICANN. But you put a really good question, Auburn, is why should they bother? And this is a good question, because what ICANN does is pretty technical. We coordinate the technical identifiers of the internet, and then we get policy is developed around the implementation of, and there are internet protocols. We have names, we have numbers. And it is not always obvious to a business, even a big ISP, frankly, why they should come to ICANN. And I think, so we have to go to them. We can't expect them to come to us. I think that's my big learning after 12 years of trying this every which way, up, down, sideways. The only time when that wasn't true was in the year or two before the IANA transition, when I experienced there was a real change in the fear in big, especially in the US actually, but around the world, businesses that the internet would just fundamentally change. And they wanted to come to ICANN to talk about that and to understand. But I think we need to accept the fact that if we keep on looking for reasons to bring people to ICANN meetings, we're trying to solve the wrong problem. We need to go out to those communities, exactly as you're describing, and to build our relationships with other people, like CSC, who do it all the time. And that's part of the maturation. So that's another critical way of building trust. And the final thing I would say, and this goes back to domain name abuse, but it's not just about that, is we have to be confident in showing that this system works. Sometimes it's easy to stay in our little technical niche and to say, you said this, Kenny, and I really like what you were saying. Maybe we should go and look at the application guides and say, hey, you know what? We can see the bad stuff coming. We can help you. I mean, I think this is a little bit what you were saying. I think that's right. I think what you're demonstrating there is a level of confidence, a level of being out on the proactive, on the front foot. We've often, I think, certainly in ICANN, but I think more broadly in the technical community, we often avoid the limelight because we're worried. We're worried that we might be regulated. And I'm not just talking about ICANN. I'm talking about the internet community as a whole. It's a cultural driver in the internet community. It's let's stay in our lanes. We're a lot of engineers, a lot of lawyers, a lot of people who are looking for, how do we protect what we have, if you like, rather than how do we, and that's important. We should protect what we have. But I think we've reached a level of maturity now that's about a state of mind. And I see it in my final comment is that in the last 2 or 3 years particularly, what I've seen in the ICANN community, which is the third thing I would say about specific actions, is many of you will know the ICANN community is structured in sort of segments. So the ASO, for example, is our numbering community, and then we have our gTLD community, which of course TWNIC is involved in. And so they're a little bit, for want of a better word, they're not siloed, that sounds like a bad word, but they're in their own specific groups. But what I have seen in the last 2 years is the coming together, quite bottom up, quite, not managed by the organization or the board, a desire for that large global community to come together. So we're seeing the Government Advisory Committee want to sit down and have regular conversations with civil society. You don't see that all that much in the non-digital world. We see that around common topics. So, for example, internet governance is particularly relevant this year. DNS abuse we talked about earlier, and I think we will see it around the potential and risks of artificial intelligence. I think another one might well be, as we come into the next round in the next 12 months, this potential for how do we bring the Web.3 together to protect a single root, these kinds of discussions. Because now these are not just topics for an individual stakeholder to group in a very technical, insidery way. We're developing the desire as well as the skills and the language to approach those as broader topics. So that's the final thing I would say, is that I would like to see us do more of that. I would like to see us have the courage, for want of a better word, yeah, it is courage actually, to step outside of our traditional lane, not in our day-to-day work, but in our engagement and communication, which you talked about, Jovan, as well, including to internet users more broadly, to understand why they need us.
Thank you, Sally. I'm mindful of time, but we still have time for 2 questions, and the next one is for Jovan. CCTLD is a building around local communities. What are the feedbacks on the current status of internet systems in Taiwan, and what next for the domain names?
Okay, thank you. I think this question is really broad. I'm not sure it's yes, I fully understand. I mean, but I think I would like to, yes, I think we talk about DNS abuse a lot. But still, I think in Taiwan, I think DNS abuse is still, I mean, the most critical challenges, I mean, in Taiwan, in our local community. So, but what is the DNS abuse, or what is the abuse, or what is the content abuse? Yes, I think everything. I mean, I think now it's all mixed. I mean, so different, and people talk different things, and different people have different expectation, and maybe assumption as well. So I think now is the internet. I mean, I should say the status. I mean, in Taiwan. So I think like a government, they have a different view, on how what role. I mean, what like CTLD should do. And NGOs, I mean, SAM, I mean, also technical community also have different views on what is their role and what their effort to do, I mean, to combat, I mean, the DNS abuse. So, but for me, I think I'll go back, I mean, to my personal view. I think what is the next, I mean, for a domain name? I think we definitely need to be the trustworthy indicators, I mean, for, everyone, I mean, to access to the web. Because now we see, we almost now see, I mean, the trust, I mean, in the digital time, I think we almost every lost, you can see like a senior, they share, I mean, they're concerned when they see, I mean, the message or when they see the link, they are so worried, they hesitate, I mean, to click. So I think we almost, I mean, lost, I mean, the trust in the digital era. So I think that we, I mean, as a, I mean, CTLD and also, I mean, a domain name, I think we, maybe we should play, the trusty, I mean, entry point, I mean, for the users, I mean, to access to the website. So what we usually do, I think it's a lot of things, I mean, we have already discussed. I think first, I think communications. Yes, I think it's, now it's the world, I mean, it's become too complicated. I really miss, I mean, maybe like 20 years ago, I mean, the internet is really promising, but now we talk more like challenges. But we need to understand, I mean, what happened on the internet, and also on our system, and also on like application layer, and all the, I mean, in the internet ecosystem. So I think it's the first thing is communications, and also for, I mean, for TWNIC, I think another thing we think is important is the information sharing. Usually we just keep information ourselves, and we don't share. We don't even share with our partners. So but actually we have so much valuable information. And to help the community, and also help all the ecosystem to figure out, how we can build a safer and more resilient, I mean, internet. I think it's another thing also we think is important. And the last one, of course, the collaborations. And I think it's not only in Taiwan, I think not only in the local community, but also, I mean, with the global partners. But also, it's not only, I mean, within, I mean, just like what I mentioned, it's not only within our traditional partners, registrars, but how to work together with the, I mean, ISPs, I mean, infrastructures, I mean, layers and application layers, I think is also very important. But the more important, I think, is still, I mean, we need to continue doing the awareness. First, I mean, we cannot do, everything. But, when, I mean, most of people don't understand that and don't understand how internet works, then we cannot, have really, insightful discussion and based on that. So I think we should continue to do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 1 minute and 25 seconds by the time I'm done speaking. And Edmund, if you've read the question, it's about IDNs. Just launch into it. We'll save some time.
So thank you for the question. And this is a question that comes in for the last 25 years. IDNs, that means different languages, but I don't know all the languages. Well, first of all, I believe in a world that has multiple languages. If you believe in a world where it's only English, go ahead. But I won't believe in it. And I think it is, if we truly believe in an open global internet, it has to reflect the languages of the world. So this brings me to, and one thing, in terms of the technology side, it is solvable. Yes, there are issues. In fact, it takes a little bit of thought, it takes a bit of time, planning, and so on. And the other thing is that it doesn't mean you as assuming you're maybe a technical person, it doesn't mean you have to learn all the languages in the world. No. Dealing with Chinese, for example, can let you deal with all the languages. That's the unified part, is the Unicode. The coding part of it, you can handle one language, you can handle all languages. So finally, on the topic, I think how to push it forward? Well, it's a matter of language justice, in my mind. It will take a movement. It is not just, there is a market failure today, I believe. There is latent demand, and it will take a movement to push it through. And the focus should be on language justice. If you believe Chinese should exist fully on the internet, then make Chinese domain names possible. And recently, I'll close with this. Recently, I saw a really interesting quote because the person touched on political issue. Is it a political issue? Well, this quote is really interesting. Defining possibilities is a political act. Well, defining the possibility of having different languages with domain names is already a political act. So let's go with a movement for language justice. That's what I think about IDNs.
Thank you so much. Can I ask for a round of applause for our panelists here today for such a wonderful conversation? Thank you, everyone. And again, we are actually finishing on time. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Gupta, for moderating this session, and thank you to all panelists. May we invite all panelists and the moderator to come to the front for a group photo for this session. And thank you to all panelists for this in-depth discussions. 再次谢谢我们所有的语坛讲者以及我们的主持人。接下来邀请语坛讲者主持人来合影一张。Please look at our photographer right in the back and the middle, right there, and with a big smile. Thank you. 请看向我们后方的摄影师。All right. Thumbs up with a photo. Thank you very much. Thank you.